There was a winter evening in 1908 that I have never been able to forget. I was a young man then, 25 years old, with little money in my pocket and even less certainty about my place in the world. I had been sent to interview a man whose name had become synonymous with American steel, American wealth, and American imagination, Andrew Carnegie. The interview was supposed to last 3 hours. It lasted 3 days. And in those 3 days, the old industrialist did not merely answer my questions. He placed in my hands a key that I have spent the rest of my life trying to understand. He looked at me across that long oak table, his eyes burning with a quiet fire, and he asked me a single question that has echoed in my mind every day since. "Young man, do you know why most men fail?" I did not. He smiled, leaned back in his chair, and gave me an answer I was not prepared to hear. Because they try to climb the mountain alone. I have spent more than half a century studying that single sentence. I have walked through the libraries of the wealthy, sat at the dinner tables of the powerful, watched the rise and fall of empires built by men who once stood where you stand now. And in every single case, without exception, I observed the same hidden law operating beneath the surface of every great achievement. No man, no matter how brilliant, no matter how driven, no matter how blessed by circumstance, no man has ever risen to the summit of his own potential by the strength of his solitary will. The mountain is too steep for one pair of legs. The wind is too cold for one heart. The path is too long for one mind to map. And yet this is the lie that the modern world has whispered into your ear since the day you were born. The lie of the self-made man, the lie of the lone genius, the lie of independence as the highest virtue. I tell you tonight, with the full weight of everything I have studied, that this lie has cost more lives, more dreams, and more fortunes than any plague in human history. Carnegie called it the Mastermind Principle. He had discovered it almost by accident in the early days of his rise from a poor Scottish immigrant to the wealthiest man in America. He had noticed that whenever two or more minds came together in a spirit of perfect harmony, focused upon a definite objective, something invisible was born between them. Not a partnership, not a friendship, not a business arrangement, something else, something stranger, a third mind, an invisible intelligence that did not belong to either man individually, but emerged from the harmony of their union. Carnegie believed, and I came to believe after 30 years of patient observation, that this third mind was capable of perceptions, intuitions, and creative leaps that neither participant could have reached alone. It was as though the alliance itself became conscious, as though the bond between the two men became a being of its own. But the most surprising part comes only now. Carnegie did not invent this principle, he merely named it. The principle itself is older than recorded history. The Greek philosophers gathered in their academies because they knew it. The medieval guilds protected it as their deepest secret. The founding fathers of America assembled in candlelit rooms because they sensed it. Every great religion, every great civilization, every great movement of human history has been born from the same hidden law, that the mind, when joined in perfect harmony with another mind aimed at the same purpose, becomes more than itself. It becomes a doorway. And through that doorway, something enters the world that could never have entered through a single soul alone. I watched this law operate in the life of Thomas Edison. The world remembers Edison as the lone wizard of Menlo Park, the solitary genius who electrified the modern world. But this is the myth, not the man. The man I knew, the man I studied, the man whose laboratory I walked through with my own feet, was surrounded at all times by a circle of minds: Henry Ford, Harvey Firestone, John Burroughs. These four men called themselves the Vagabonds, and every summer for more than a decade, they disappeared together into the American wilderness, sleeping in tents, cooking over open fires, talking late into the night about ideas that would later reshape the 20th century. Their conversations gave birth to the assembly line, to the rubber industry, to the modern conception of mass production itself. Not one of these inventions came from a single mind. Every one of them was born in the space between minds. Every one of them was a child of the mastermind. And here I must pause to tell you something that took me many years to understand. The mastermind principle is not a technique. It is not a method. It is not a productivity system that you can apply on a Tuesday afternoon and expect to see results by Friday. The mastermind principle is a law of nature, as real and as inviolable as the law of gravity. You do not apply gravity. Gravity applies you. And in the same way, the moment two minds enter into a state of perfect harmony around a definite purpose, the law begins to operate whether you understand it or not. The question was never whether the principle works. The question was always whether you would be wise enough to enter into harmony with another mind or foolish enough to spend your life trying to lift the world alone. What Hill discovered about this subject was deeply unsettling, and I will share it with you now without softening its edges. I came to realize, after years of interviewing the most successful men of my generation, that the quality of a man's life was determined almost entirely by the quality of the minds he allowed into his inner circle. Show me the 5 people you spend the most time with, and I will show you your future, not because of what those people will do for you, but because of what their minds will do to yours. Every conversation is an exchange of mental currency. Every relationship is a transfusion of belief. The man who surrounds himself with small minds will never think a great thought, no matter how hard he tries. The man who surrounds himself with fearful minds will never act with courage, no matter how loudly he proclaims his bravery. And the man who surrounds himself with mediocre minds will spend his entire life convinced that mediocrity is the natural condition of humanity. This is the tragedy I witnessed again and again. Men of enormous potential, dragged down to the level of their companions, never knowing that their failure was not a failure of talent, but a failure of association. The detail most people overlook is hidden right here. The mastermind principle does not work simply because 2 heads are better than 1. That is the shallow interpretation, the businessman's interpretation, the interpretation that sells books but does not change lives. The deeper truth is this: when 2 minds enter into harmony, they do not merely combine their knowledge. They tune themselves to a higher frequency of thought. The mind, you must understand, is a vibrating instrument. Every thought you have sends out a frequency into the invisible field that surrounds all life. When your frequency meets the frequency of another mind that is tuned to the same purpose, the 2 waves do not simply add together. They amplify. They multiply. They open a channel into what I have called infinite intelligence, the vast reservoir of knowledge and creative power that lies behind the surface of the visible world. This is why the great achievers throughout history have always come in clusters, why the Renaissance was not the work of 1 painter, but of dozens, all in conversation with each other, why the American founding was not the work of 1 statesman, but of a council of minds gathered in Philadelphia in the heat of summer, arguing through the night. Genius is contagious, but so is its absence. I want you to consider for a moment the man you have become. Consider the people whose voices fill your ears each day. Consider the minds that have access to your inner sanctuary. Whose dreams are you absorbing? Whose fears are you inheriting? Whose limitations are you mistaking for your own? Most men go through life never asking these questions, and so they never realize that the prison they live in was built 1 conversation at a time by people who had no idea they were holding the bricks. The first act of any man who wishes to rise is the act of curating his associations, not cruelly, not coldly, but deliberately, with the same care a gardener takes when he decides which seeds to plant in his finest soil. Your mind is the finest soil you will ever own. Do not let just anyone scatter their weeds in it. Here begins the darkest game of the subconscious mind. I observed in my decades of research that the subconscious does not distinguish between the thoughts you generate yourself and the thoughts that are placed into you by others. To the subconscious, all thoughts are simply seeds, and all seeds, if watered long enough, will grow. This is why the mastermind principle is so terrifyingly powerful and so terrifyingly dangerous. A negative mastermind is just as real as a positive one. When men gather around shared resentment, shared fear, shared cynicism, they too create a 3rd mind. But this 3rd mind is a destroyer rather than a creator. It feeds on its participants and gives back ruin. I have seen entire families bound together by such a mastermind for generations, each member convinced that their misfortune was personal, never suspecting that they were swimming in a sea of inherited despair. I have seen entire workplaces poisoned by it, entire neighborhoods, entire nations. The mastermind does not care whether you use it for creation or destruction. It only cares whether you have entered the harmony. Carnegie understood this better than anyone. He told me on that winter evening in 1908 that he had built his fortune not by his own intelligence, but by surrounding himself with men whose intelligence he could harness. I am not the smartest man in my company, he said to me, but I have been clever enough to hire men who are smarter than I am and wise enough to listen to them when they speak. This was the secret hidden in plain sight. The wealthiest man in America was not a genius. He was a conductor. He stood at the center of an orchestra of minds, and his only true gift was his ability to bring them into harmony. When you understand this, the entire mythology of success begins to crumble. The lone hero, the self-made titan, the solitary climber. These are stories we tell ourselves because they are easier to swallow than the truth. The truth is that no man rises alone, and the man who insists on trying is committing a slow and ceremonial suicide of his own potential. What the lives of great achievers have been trying to tell us for centuries is this: the highest function of a human being is not to become independent, but to become harmonious. Independence is the desperate cry of a soul that has been wounded by bad alliances. Harmony is the mature understanding of a soul that has learned which alliances are worth its trust. The young man dreams of standing alone on the mountaintop. The wise man dreams of arriving at the mountaintop with his brothers. There is a vast distance between these two dreams, and the journey from one to the other is the journey of becoming truly successful. Most men never make it. They mistake their wounds for wisdom and their isolation for strength, and they die in the foothills, never knowing that the summit was waiting for them just a few alliances away. I want to speak now about the spirit of our age, because I believe the modern world has become uniquely hostile to the mastermind principle, and this is the secret cause of an epidemic of failure that no one can name. We live in an era that worships the individual to a degree that no previous age would have recognized. The cult of the personal brand, the cult of the solitary entrepreneur, the cult of the influencer who claims to have built everything from nothing in their bedroom by the strength of their own grit. This is the new mythology, and it is far more dangerous than the old one because it cloaks itself in the language of empowerment while quietly producing one of the loneliest generations in human history. Modern man scrolls through 10,000 faces a day and has no one to call when his soul is in crisis. He has more connections than any of his ancestors and less communion than any of them. He is surrounded by voices and starved for harmony, and this is no accident. The architecture of modern life has been deliberately constructed to keep your mind isolated and reactive, because an isolated mind is a purchasable mind, and a reactive mind is a controllable mind. The forces that profit from your distraction do not want you to enter into harmony with another sovereign mind around a definite purpose. They want you to enter into harmony with their algorithms. They want your frequency tuned to their feed. They want the third mind that emerges from your daily life to be a third mind they have engineered, designed to keep you consuming and never creating. This is the great unspoken war of our time, and most men are losing it without ever knowing they are in a battle. The first step to winning that war is the act of consciously building your own mastermind, in defiance of the algorithm, in defiance of the noise, in defiance of the entire machinery of distraction that has been built around your life. The real turning point begins here. I have come to believe that the mastermind you build will determine the destiny you live. And so the question is not whether you have the talent to succeed. The question is whether you have the courage to choose your circle. Because building a true mastermind is not easy. It requires you to admit, first of all, that you cannot do it alone. And the modern man would rather die than admit this. It requires you to become vulnerable enough to share your definite purpose with another human being. And most men have buried their definite purpose so deep that they have forgotten what it looks like. It requires you to listen, truly listen, to a mind that may see what you cannot see. And listening has become a lost art in an age of broadcasting. It requires patience, loyalty, and the willingness to give before you receive. None of these qualities are fashionable. All of them are necessary. Let me tell you how Henry Ford built his mastermind, because his story contains a lesson that I do not think has been properly understood. Ford was a man of limited formal education. He had been ridiculed by the press, who once called him an ignoramus in print. Ford sued the newspaper, and during the trial, the opposing lawyer attempted to humiliate him by asking him a series of factual questions about history and general knowledge. Ford could not answer most of them. The lawyer was triumphant, certain he had exposed Ford as a fool. But Ford leaned forward and said something I have never forgotten. He said that on his desk he had a row of buttons. By pressing the right button, he could summon a man who knew the answer to any question he might need answered. "Why?" Ford asked. "Should I clutter my mind with general knowledge when I have surrounded myself with men who can supply me with any knowledge I require?" The courtroom fell silent. The lawyer had no answer, because Ford had revealed in a single sentence the deepest secret of his success. He was not the genius behind the Ford Motor Company. He was the conductor of a mastermind that contained the genius of 100 specialized minds, each tuned to the harmony of his definite purpose. This was the principle that built one of the greatest fortunes in American history. And it is the same principle, unchanged in its essence, that is available to you tonight in whatever room you are sitting in, with whatever resources you currently possess. Now, I must speak of a paradox that lies at the heart of this principle, because without understanding the paradox, you will misuse the principle and never know why it failed you. The paradox is this: the mastermind cannot be built from a place of need. The man who seeks alliance because he is desperate, because he is failing, because he wants someone to rescue him, will never form a true mastermind. He will form only a relationship of dependency, and dependency poisons the harmony that the principle requires. The mastermind must be built from a place of contribution, not consumption. You must come to your alliances with something to give, not merely something to take. Even if what you have to give is only your loyalty, your faith, your willingness to serve a shared purpose with everything you have, that is enough. But you must come bearing a gift. The man who arrives empty-handed at the table of the mastermind will leave empty-handed, no matter how full the table appears. This is the paradox of harmony. You receive only what you are first willing to give, and the universe, which is far older and far stranger than most men suppose, keeps the most accurate ledger ever devised. I observed this paradox in the life of every great achiever I studied. None of them began their ascent by asking what others could do for them. All of them began by asking what they could contribute to a circle of mutual elevation. This is why the mastermind works most powerfully when it is formed not for personal gain, but for a purpose larger than the individuals involved. When the purpose is large enough, the participants forget their own ambitions and become absorbed in the shared vision. And it is in this forgetting of self that the third mind awakens most fully. The selfish mastermind is a shallow mastermind. The self-transcending mastermind is a deep one. And the depth of your mastermind will determine the depth of the achievements that flow from it. There is one more dimension of this principle that I must share with you, because without it, your understanding will remain incomplete. The mastermind is not limited to the living. I came to realize, late in my studies, that the principle could be extended into a relationship with the great minds of the past. I myself developed a practice that I called the Council of Invisible Counselors. Each night, before sleep, I would gather around an imagined table the figures whose qualities I most wished to develop in myself. Emerson for vision, Lincoln for patience, Edison for persistence, Carnegie for organization. I would speak to them in my mind. I would ask their counsel on the questions of my life. And over the years, something remarkable began to happen. Their voices became distinct. Their personalities became real. I began to receive insights in their presence that I could not have generated on my own. Whether this was the work of my own subconscious dramatizing wisdom I had absorbed from their writings, or whether it was something more mysterious, a genuine communion across the boundary of time, I will not pretend to know. I only know that the practice transformed my mind, and I have recommended it to every serious student of success that I have ever met. You, too, can build such a council. You are not limited to the living people in your immediate environment. The minds of the great are preserved in their writings, in their biographies, in the records of their decisions. You can apprentice yourself to a master who died a century ago, and the apprenticeship will be as real as any you could undertake with a living teacher, perhaps more real because the dead have already finished their journey, and they cannot betray you, distract you, or disappoint you. Read their words, sit with their thoughts, ask their counsel in the silence before sleep. Build your inner counsel before you build your outer one, and your outer one will arrive more easily because you will have trained your mind to recognize the frequency of greatness when you encounter it in living form. The greatest discovery of my life was not the mastermind principle itself. It was the realization that this principle had been hidden in plain sight throughout the entire history of human achievement, and that the men who had used it most effectively had often been the men least able to articulate why it worked. They simply knew by some deep instinct that they were not alone and that their alliances were the source of their power. The articulation of the principle was my contribution, but the principle itself belongs to the ages. It is yours by birthright. It has been waiting for you. The only question is whether you will claim it or continue to wander through your life pretending that you can carry your dreams on your own shoulders all the way to the summit, in the dark, in the wind, alone. I want to leave you tonight with an image that has stayed with me for 60 years. It is the image of Carnegie's hand, wrinkled and strong, resting on the oak table between us on that winter evening in 1908. He was the wealthiest man in the world. He could have done anything with that hand, signed a check, summoned a servant, struck a bargain. Instead, he extended it across the table toward me, a young man with nothing to offer him, and he said, "If you give me 20 years of your life to study the laws of success, I will give you the introductions you will need to interview the greatest men of our age." It was a mastermind alliance formed in a single sentence between an old man at the summit and a young man at the foothills. It changed my life. It built my life. And every word I have spoken to you tonight is the fruit of that handshake. Somewhere in the architecture of your own existence, there is a hand reaching toward you across a table, offering you the alliance that could change everything. It may be the mind of a living mentor you have not yet had the courage to approach. It may be the mind of a peer who is ready to climb beside you. It may be the mind of a great soul from the past, waiting in the pages of a book you have not yet opened. The hand is there. The alliance is offered. The mastermind is forming with you or without you in this very moment. And so I leave you with the question that has guided my own life and which I now place gently into your keeping. When was the last time you stopped trying to climb the mountain alone? And whose hand have you been refusing to take? Sleep on this question tonight. Wake with it tomorrow. And when you are ready, when the loneliness of the solitary climb has become more painful than the vulnerability of the shared ascent, you will know what to do. The third mind is waiting. It has always been waiting. It is, perhaps, the oldest patience in the universe. And in our next gathering, I will tell you of the force that prepares a man to be worthy of such alliances, the inner discipline of definite major purpose, without which no mastermind, however brilliant, can carry you to the heights you were born to reach. Until then, I leave you in the silence between thoughts, where the harmony begins.